Tēnā koutou katoa, and good afternoon and absolute welcome here this evening. And welcome to the Link University's Excellence Series, which is a series of talks dedicated to celebrating the academic reputation, particularly of our professoriate here at the university. Through this series, we aim to engage in and contribute to public debates on many of the critical issues facing our country and our communities, and showcase the impact of outstanding research and teaching. Great pleasure this evening to welcome Professor Paul Dalziel here as he shares his research on wellbeing economics. Paul has a long history with the Agribusiness and Economics Research Unit that we are particularly proud of here at the university, and they've done many projects of great interest to New Zealand. His research focuses on economic and social policy, with a particular interest in regional and economic development and sustainable well-being, investigating how persons, households, communities, markets, regions, countries, and the global community can expand capability for human well-being. Paul spends a large part of his time engaging with industry and policy advisors to determine critical research questions and deliver new knowledge arising from his scientific work. Paul is one book I'm particularly interested in, is the lead author of Wellbeing Economics, the capability approach to prosperity, which was the 5th most downloaded book in economics published by Palgrove Macmillan in 2018. We look forward to hearing from Paul this evening. Thank you very much.
Tēnā rangatira mā, tēnā koutou katoa. Kei te mihi ahau ki ngā tonga katoa o kai te rua hiki ki taumutu, mana whenua o tēnei taki wā. Ka iti taki mōhio ki te reo Māori, engari kei te mihi ahau ki tēnei tonga o enei motu, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa. So, I've been pleased to acknowledge Taumutu as mana whenua of this place, and to say my knowledge of Te Reo is small, but I honour this treasure of these islands. Okay, in a nutshell, this is what I want to say, that New Zealand Specialist Land-Based University is ready to make new and important contributions to wellbeing in Aotearoa. When you see this slide again, I'm finished. Hopefully there'll be something in between. All right, so here's just some background facts and figures to justify why we have this opportunity to contribute to wellbeing. New Zealand is a very unusual OECD country, and that 60% of our merchandise exports is food and beverages. Iceland is the next at 40%, the third highest with only 20%, and the median, the average is 10%. So very unusual. Secondly, if we look at our primary energy consumption, we are in the top quintile for using natural renewable energy sources, hydroelectric, essentially. Again, Iceland is way up the top with their geothermal resources, but we're in that top group. A third of the land is in the country's conservation estate. A very high percentage, and of course we rely on that a lot in our profiling of the country as a tourist destination. Yet even as we look at those facts and figures, the great majority of New Zealanders live in an urban environment, and that gap between rural New Zealanders and urban living New Zealanders is growing. So here we are, our prosperity comes from our natural environment, but more and more New Zealanders are living in an urban environment. And so already this is a challenge for a land-based university. How do we bridge those two realities as part of our mission to the land-based sector? Now, I don't want to exaggerate that difference. This is a paper that has just been pre-published for the Journal of the Royal Society of New Zealand, and it's based on survey evidence that the understandings of what it is to be a good farmer are not that different between rural and urban populations in this country. So I don't want to emphasize the difference, but nevertheless, there is a difference and it's growing wider. Okay, the AERU, the Agribusiness and Economics Research Unit. We were founded in 1962, 62 years ago next month, and we ended up at Lincoln because of this person, Brian Philpott. So Brian Philpott was the founding professor of agricultural economics. I'm the fifth to hold that chair, and therefore almost certainly the last to know all of his predecessors personally. And Brian was asked to lead a research unit that was to help the land-based sectors of Aotearoa, New Zealand, meet the challenge of Britain as Britain moved towards what's now the European Union. In all probability, we should have been part of the Department for Science and Industrial Research, Scientific and Industrial Research, DSIR, but Brian Philpott was having none of that. He was happy to be a professor in the University of New Zealand. And so we got hosted by what's now Lincoln University and have remained here ever since. What it means is that a bit unusually for a group within a university in this country, we are a triple helix institution. So this is an institution that deliberately partners long-term with industry and with government policy agencies to co-design research that the three parties agree would be valuable. And so we've been doing that for 62 years, and for the last 10 years, we have had an advisory board of about 20 people, leaders in the private sector and the public sector, guiding us in our research on global agri-food value chains. So this has been our mission, and this is what remains a core part of what we do today. As part of those partnerships, we have had a series of rich partnerships with Māori organisations, so Ngāi Tahu predominantly, but Wakatu Incorporation at the top of the South Island, Tūhoi Tua Whenua, Aoraki Milk and others, all of them around helping the partners create and capture value through their agri-food exports. And currently, I'm down to 3 days a week at Lincoln University, and half of the time I'm not at Lincoln, I'm at the University of Canterbury at the Ngāi Tahu Centre, where I'm doing research with Dr. Matt Scobie and Dr. John Reid under the mana of Professor Te Mairi Tau, funded by Partners for a New Economy. And I'll be drawing on some of that research towards the end of the talk, so I thank Partners for a New Economy for their support. And we had our birthday very recently. You were all invited, some of you came. and the Vice-Chancellor, Grant Edwards, said some very nice things about what we had done over 60 years, and certainly informing what I am saying today. This is our formal mission statement. So we're exercising leadership and research for sustainable wellbeing. We've had that statement for about 20 years. And as Grant said, we were approached by Palgrave Macmillan to write on our mission statement, what is our wellbeing economics approach. And so that was published in September 2018. As you said, that year it was the fifth most downloaded book. And there's been just over 102,000 accesses since, which is a lot for a New Zealand book on economics. We're pleased with that. Okay, so this is the framework. And I'm not going to go through all of it. That would take the full 30 minutes plus more. But the framework has three parts to it. And the top is the idea that people acting individually and in collaboration with each other are able to create individual and community well-being. And we can measure that well-being using a series of statistical indicators. So that list of indicators comes from the Treasury's Living Standards Framework, but any community, any region, anybody can create their own list, depending on what it is to lead the kind of life that you value and have reason to value. Now, to promote well-being, people are empowered to take action at different levels. So you can think of the individual person making choices, collaborating within whānau and families, joining with others in civil society, cooperating in a market economy to create and capture value, local government, central government, and then the whole global family. All of those different levels, people acting, and they draw on the services of our accumulated wealth at the bottom of the diagram. So these different types of wealth are producing services that we use as part of creating the kinds of lives that we value and have reason to value. And part of our responsibility in every generation is to reinvest in those capital stocks, and sensitivities around those words, capital stocks, but those capital stocks have a legacy to the next generation, passing on to the future more than we received in the past. And I want to draw attention in particular to knowledge capital. So knowledge capital is this accumulating, growing stock of what we as a species know. Now, any philosophers in the room, we could argue for months about what we know and what we don't know and how we know what we know, etc., etc. But it's just this idea that people in this university are creating new knowledge. And we know what that means. And that new knowledge is expanding the total capital stock of knowledge. And that knowledge capital is really important for helping people create well-being. So, in particular, there's a theory in economics called endogenous growth theory, and it asks the question, okay, economists, you're always banging on about growth. What causes growth? And the answer is the only thing that can sustain growth and living standards is growth in knowledge. Growth in capital won't do it. That's the neoclassical growth theory, invented in 1956. And it demonstrates mathematically that it won't support growth because everything comes to a stable equilibrium where, any economists in the room, the capital-labour ratio is fixed and the economy grows only at the rate of population growth. Knowledge, or technology if you like, is the only thing that can support growth and living standards. So consequently, universities are essential for wellbeing. And this is going to be my theme. Lincoln University has a particular role in contributing to wellbeing because of our relationship to knowledge. All right, so knowledge and the land-based sector. Think of this in part 2, if you like. And fortunately for this part, most of the work has already been done in this wonderful article that has been written by John Carradis, let me get them right, Stephen Goldson, Derek Luke, Jacqueline Roweth, and Alan Stewart. We know all of those people, just about all of us. These are giants in our field. I'll come back to that. And they have written this article, published last year, where their motivation was to record how research, development, and innovative farmer practice supports New Zealand's grazed pastoral systems as the economic base of the country's prosperity. It's a big project, but they do it really well. Nearly 400 references in their review. It's something that I thoroughly recommend. The title of the article makes the observation that our economic prosperity in this country is based on an introduced grassland ecology, the grassland revolution, it's often referred to, and technological advances. And Lincoln University, as we now call ourselves, has a proud history in this space. And the paper demonstrates over nearly 50 pages the enormous intellectual and other resources needed to maintain, and these are words taken from the article, this transplanted ecology in this foreign land. So the name of the section describing Aotearoa as a foreign land. And the language resonates with sort of a heart transplant or a kidney transplant. You know, something from overseas has been brought here into a foreign body, and all sorts of scientific knowledge is being created to stop it from being rejected. So I'll come back to this, obviously. So it's not just intellectual resources. Here's a graph of our imports of fertilizers. And on the vertical axis, it's millions of tons. And so over the last decade, we have imported 13 million tons of fertilizer to keep the soil fertile and stable in order to support the transplanted ecology. And we're still at about 1 million tons a year. At the same time, a large huge amount of our food and fibre is exported. So for dairy products, it's about 90% of what we produce goes overseas ultimately. But for the sector as a whole, the bottom line, it's 80%. So the picture I'm painting here is of a country that is reliant on getting good value for its exported food and fibre products. And the opportunities there have increased dramatically over the last 2 decades. So we were the first Western country to have a free trade agreement or a trade agreement with China. And further trade agreements since then mean we now have a consumer base globally of about 3 billion people. And people talk about, for each of our main export categories, they would each feed about 40 million people out of those 3 billion people. So we have this opportunity of increasing the well-being of New Zealand by targeting the 40 million people who most value the food and fibre that we produce. There's some slippage in those statements, but the scale is about right. We are looking for the proverbial needle in the haystack who values our exports most. And that's been a huge amount of the work we have done in the AERU over the last decade or so. So, distinguished Professor Caroline Saunders is in the front here, and this was her speaking at a conference. Nothing should leave New Zealand at a commodity price. How do we find those market segments around the world that will pay the highest premium for New Zealand food and fibre? Now, her work started to capture global attention in the food miles debate. And this was a consumer movement in the UK saying that the UK should reduce consumption of food that travels a long way. Now, I don't know if you've been to the UK recently, but we're about as far away as we can be from the UK. So this was a major challenge. Caroline wrote this paper with Andrew Barber and went on holiday in the UK. And MPAT rang up and said, look, do you mind if we take a week of your holiday and put you in front of all of these dignitaries, because the food miles debate has begun to gather momentum and we want you to stop. And so she did. And you won't be able to read this, but this is a House of Commons briefing paper in the UK, and it records that the British government advocates for sustainability in food, but does not criticise food miles. So that was a huge achievement, and that got her in the door of boards of companies like Fonterra, and that led to a decade of research around how do we find those consumers who were worried about food miles and therefore worried about the sustainability credentials of the food they are eating. How do we find those ones that value New Zealand production systems the best. Great taste, great texture, great appearance, but also stewardship of the land, investment in the local community, cultural integrity, and so on, animal well-being. Now, you'll see John Reid featuring on those, so I want to honour him. So John has been in partnership with us. He's at the Ngāi Tahu Centre at the University of Canterbury and also a researcher in his own company. And all of those partnerships with Māori, John was involved one way or another. He was the person who designed the Ngāi Tahu Pounamu value chain all those years ago. Tawhai Matonga was the person who did the original research in the AERU, and now it's doing great things. Okay, so that has been influential. It's had impact. So Te Hono is a private sector led, public sector supported initiative in the sector to try and promote this vision of increasing greater value. The Made with Care program, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, we provided some of the research and they picked up our methodology, which they are carrying on with an Auckland-based company. Manawa Honey is based in the middle of the North Island, and they have won global prizes for the taste of their honey, but they've used our work to capture greater value as a result of being able to profile their stewardship of the forests as part of their honey making venture. And Taste Pure Nature, we did 8 studies in 2 countries and 2 products, 1 December, as part of the lead up to the launch of that brand. Okay, so to summarise, the knowledge that we have created here, along with others, have been in 2 spaces. The first is the grassland revolution. So how can we grow more grass in order to feed more stock, in order to produce more volume? And then how can we design more kits in order to capture more premiums and therefore create more value? And KIBS stands for Knowledge Intensive Business Services. It's basically knowledge capital again. How do we know our consumers in order to target and profile what we have to offer to the people who value it the most? In order to grow more grass, we need to import fertiliser in particular, and we capture this value mostly overseas. 8% comes from exporting food and beverages. So what I've drawn there is a value chain. And sometimes you read in Treasury documents that New Zealand's so far removed from the rest of the world that we can't participate in value chains. And it's true, we aren't part of the value chains for automobiles, for example. That would be ridiculous. But we do have a primary global value chain, primary as in first and primary as in primary sector. And it's this. We are importing fertilisers in order to grow more grass in a transplanted ecology to produce food and fibre, 80% of which is exported, and that's fundamentally based on science. Now, I'm coming back to this diagram. If any of you are worried about this, I am coming back. I'm now going to look forward. This is part 3 of 3 parts. So this is Sir Isaac Newton. If I've seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. And all of the people I've mentioned so far are giants. Giants in the science community who have done amazing things to create and capture greater value from greater volume. I also think that every generation sees things clearer that are closer to us, because each generation learns to recognise what was hidden in plain sight to previous generations. And so let me introduce to you this person, who is Hugh Campbell, and he's Professor of Sociology at the University of Otago. And he started his career in the AERU. He was working with Professor John Fairweather on a funded project on rural public drinking. I don't know if any of you remember the controversies at the time, but he said things about pub drinking in Methven that people in Methven didn't altogether appreciate. And so he went on the Paul Holmes show. Anybody remember Paul Holmes? And fun and games was had by everyone. Anyway, Hugh is now a professor of sociology at the University of Otago. And 3 years ago, he published a book called Farming Inside Invisible Worlds. And it's that invisible worlds I want to emphasise, this seeing things close to us that we previously overlooked. So all 4 of Hugh's grandparents were farmers, and there are 6 farms in his whakapapa. And so he's gone back and he's uncovered the stories of each of the farms and tried to think about what does this mean, as well as being a rural sociologist. And this is from page 1 of the book. He said we need to understand the visible and invisible powers of farms. Now, by that, he doesn't mean invisible powers as in we can't see the powers. He means the power to make things invisible. In our day-to-day conversations between farmers, there are certain things that we don't see. And farms are anything but mundane. Their histories are both triumphant and catastrophic, and the consequences of their power to make things invisible shape the crises of our contemporary worlds. Now, he's talking in part about impact on waterways, for example, that I'm not qualified to judge. But he's also talking about this that I do want to comment on. At some point around the 1920s, between the wars, in New Zealand, farms began to be narrated in ways that ceased to recognise any deep colonial past. Instead, they were increasingly represented by an academic narrative about the technical triumphs of the emerging discipline of agricultural science. And I think the article I cited at the beginning is a good example. Okay, it has a section on Māori agriculture. The section is called Pre-European. And then Māori disappeared. And the rest of the article is totally about this is the amazing technical triumphs that agricultural science has produced. Now, this is just an observation. That's what I mean by invisible. It's been lost from view. Richard Shaw is embarking on a similar project. So he's professor in politics at Massey University. He's published 2 books. And he has 3 family farms in his whakapapa. And he's embarking on the same project. How did they come into our family's ownership? Our family arrived in this country with nothing, no capital. And yet, within a generation, we owned 3 farms. How did that happen? And so he refers to the New Zealand Settlements Act, 1863. It's the second time it's been mentioned on campus today. There was a workshop earlier about items like this. And the Act's main purpose was to legitimate the confiscation of all Māori land in districts decreed to be in rebellion, so Taranaki and Waikato. And it goes to say, the Act made the humble family farm a central instrument of colonial policy. That's a big claim. It's a big claim. Hugh agrees. So Hugh similarly describes farms as agents of colonisation. And this is how he writes it. Parcel of land by parcel of land, fence line by fence line, name by name, the great interior of New Zealand was encapsulated into privately owned Pākehā farms that rendered invisible the older ties and bonds. There's that word again, invisible. So I think we understand now through the work of the Waitangi Tribunal in particular. Here on the South Island, it wasn't armed invasion, it was land sale contracts with major items were not honoured. Raupatu is the name given to the confiscations in the North Island and the operation of the Native Land Court, where Sir Hugh Kafaru has written the definitive book on that topic. So here's the diagram again. And this is the bit that I think has been invisible to my generation, which I think we're in a position now to see, which is that the transplanted ecology lies on colonised whenua. And this is part of the challenge we face. And, you know, we like challenges. Challenges are good. That's what we've been about for nearly 150 years in this place, recognising and responding to challenges. So this is important for a land-based university, those two features, transplanted ecology and colonised whenua. Why do I say that? Well, this is our founder, well, founding director, I suppose would be director, William would be better, William Ivey. And when he arrived, he wrote an article setting out his vision for what has become Lincoln University, an agricultural school, when he first arrived. I take it, he wrote, that the aim of the agricultural school is to train those sons of colonists who are intended to follow the calling of the farmer. It's not often you get the sectors of the racism and the class system all in one sentence, but there we go. Our founder did it. And you might think that was a long, long time ago. And really, who can take seriously today somebody who has facial hair like that? But this was our 75th anniversary. So this is Ian there. So that's more recent. Okay, this is just after the war. And he quotes the whole paragraph in which that sentence sits. Writing of the object and aims of the School of Agriculture, Ivey submitted a viewpoint in 1880, which has stood the test of time and can be reiterated in 1955 in respect to the years which lie ahead. Okay, so we've been part of the colonist project. This is something that, as an institution, we are facing up to. And the response has been decolonisation. This is not trying to go back to some mythical, magical period before 1840. It's about becoming conscious of the systems that we are helping to reproduce and opening up to transformation that can be called decolonisation, creating room for Indigenous worldviews, etc., etc. So here's just three covers of publications that have talked about this in a university context, all of which I think are very rich in the material they hold. And as we demolish aspects of our history, there is an opportunity for us to be part of that. And I think we're up for it as an institution. Perhaps not so much people like myself about to retire, but there's a new generation of scholars that are totally up for this and are excited by these challenges. So I want to introduce Matt Scobie, who is one of these young scholars, senior lecturer in the University of Canterbury Business School. And if you look at him, you might think, surely that's familiar, because Matt is the grandson of Sir James Stewart, former professor of farm management, former principal of Lincoln College for a decade, and the Stewart block is named after Matt's grandfather. So Matt has just published a book last month called The Economic Possibilities of Decolonisation. There's been no book on economics written like this anywhere. And it's very short. I recommend it to everyone. Very rich, very thought-provoking, and opening up possibilities that I think are exciting. And I'm just going to concentrate on one sentence. That's a lot of the book, because it's only a small book. So. Here it is, as priorities for the land. And, you know, we're a land-based institution. This is my theme. And so Matt quotes Te Maru Tau, the director of the Ngaitahu Research Centre, who said priorities for the land are coping with climate change, addressing water issues, and encouraging feelings of community ownership. Now, these are phrases we use all the time around here at Lincoln. We might talk about license to operate rather than feelings of community ownership, but those three things are core to who we are. And the refreshed strategy in particular is creating 2 new research institutes, the Institute of Climate Resilience and the Lincoln University State of Land Project. Now, they could very easily address those priorities for land. Very easily. And so this is visionary, I think. This is why I say, as an institution, I think we're up for this. We are so ready for it. And Isaac Newton, I've quoted him twice now. I want to commend another giant on whose shoulders we stand, and this is Professor Hirani Matunga. And his leadership for 20 years, well, longer if you count both terms of service at Lincoln University, have been outstanding. So, we have a lot of resources in this institution for promoting this vision. I also want to mention Bioprotection Aotearoa, where Professor Amanda Black is the director, and distinguished Professor Philip Hume is one of the 3 deputy directors. And this is their research framework. And I want to focus in particular on this sentence. The foundation of our whare is Papatūānuku, Mother Earth. The foundation of our whare is Papatūānuku. This is land-based in a different sense from the way we usually use it at Lincoln to describe ourselves. This is us based literally on the land. The foundation is the land. And so I think that the strategy update invites us to perform science in a renewed relationship with the land, not seeing the land as the object of our study, but seeing the land as the foundations upon which we are based. We have the opportunity to be a whenua-based university, not one of the top 5 in the world, the best in the world. And that means continuing our proud tradition of science excellence while taking care to listen to what Moana Jackson called the stories in the land, including colonisation, as a feature of that science excellence, not a tack on, but as part of the way we do science. Observation and experimentation, that's science. Listening to the stories in the land, observation and experimentation. So I return to the last slide. New Zealand's specialist land-based university is ready to make new and important contributions to wellbeing in Aotearoa. E te whānau, kua muchitaku kōrero mo tēnei rā, that finishes my talk for now. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, that is you, kia ora tātou katoa, may you and I, all of us together, enjoy wellbeing. Kia ora. Yeah.
Very much.
My vision.
That was impressive. And, so there's a few occasions where I sit and put down the pen and actually listen to something. And the one I got there was around the university strategy and the interpretation of the strategy. And there was part of that which was interpretation of being a land-based for the land-based sectors, which we often talk about interpretation of how we support agriculture, tourism, conservation, environment. Whereas imposed in different interpretation here, that we are as a place on essentially on top of them has been key characteristic as well. And so I really appreciate the interpretation of that. But I'm sure there are many questions in this presentation. So I'll open the floor now. Please just state your name.
Kia ora. I'm Anita Reiford. Was in the AERU, so relatively recently. Thank you, Paul. I really was inspired by your talk, and I was really relieved when you got to the third part, because until then my blood pressure was, my question might have been if you hadn't swung around, I guess. And so I guess my question isn't perhaps so much a question, just exploring that traditional relationship of imposing these other systems and importing fertilizer and not even thinking about the impact of that in the countries we've imported the fertilizer from, and then exporting all of that and then sort of using the land as like an empty vessel kind of, and we're left with the impacts of that. How do you think we can change that sort of dominant paradigm we operate under?
Transformation. I mean, transformation is hard, but I think the case studies with global agri-food value chains with our Māori partners show that change is happening. And this is why I'm excited by the two centres, that in thinking about climate resilience, that will require us to pay greater attention to the stories in the land. You know, where we have cyclones ripping through, destroying production areas. So we are going to have to change, or change will be imposed upon us. I think the decolonisation literature is fundamentally an appeal to imagination. Imagine a different future, imagine a different relationship. Listen to people who have been listening to those stories for 800 years, and together we can create the science that will produce well-being. That's the vision, I think. But there's no silver bullet tucked away here saying, right, now I have your attention, I want you to all go out and do this. It's not. It's it's a huge sector with decentralized decision makers. So it's about inspiring and incentivizing and stimulating imagination, supported by science excellence that shows what is feasible. And we can be the leaders in that space.
I have a question, Paul. You spoke about the endogenous growth theory.
Yes.
This explains knowledge is the only factor that can sustain growth and living standards. How does it reconcile with our current extremely low level of investment as a country in knowledge, whether that's in research or in education? Are we on a pathway to a significant drop in living standards?
Okay, you touched a really sensitive point. So let me tell a story. Caroline and I wrote to a senior manager, tier 3 senior manager, who's responsible at the time for writing about New Zealand's economic pathways, possibilities, strategies. Can we come and talk to you about endogenous growth theory? And we would like to write a piece suitable for your organisation about what endogenous growth theory says about raising living standards. And the reply was, I have talked about this with my colleagues. We do not have the bandwidth to engage with endogenous growth theory. This is a Nobel Prize winning theory that has been around for 30 years. We don't have the bandwidth to engage with that theory. Is there something else you would like to talk about? So we have been desperate to try and stimulate conversations in Wellington about what this theory means. And it's not difficult to understand. You know, if you want this glass of water, I've got to give it up and I can't have it. But if I know how something works, I can tell you how it works, and we can both use that knowledge without affecting the other person. So this is the fundamental difference about knowledge capital compared to the others. That means it's able to create what economists call increasing returns to scale, which is the only thing that can drive ongoing growth in living standards. So it's really simple to understand and has all sorts of implications that I hope Peter Gluckman is thinking about as he goes through his 2 reviews. But there is this inertia in Wellington that is trapped in the world of neoclassical growth theory, which this builds on, and they're not ready to take the next leap. So we're totally join you in frustration that that hasn't happened. Mr. Back.
So sort of along those lines, I'm thinking about inequality. You can have knowledge and it's producing extra prosperity, perhaps on average, but we also seem to have a cost of living crisis and some trends in terms of increasing inequality globally, I think. I mean, how do you reconcile those two aspects? I mean, how do you encourage well-being for everybody, not just for the...
Yes, no, good point. So I'm part of the Wellbeing Economic Alliance, and you might have heard of donut economics, for example, that gets some people very cross. And it says that the role of a 21st century economist is to understand planetary boundaries, which we are exceeding, our generation, and social foundations. And so it's exactly as you've said, we've got to hold those two things at once and design economic systems that puts us in the middle where people get access to opportunities, including clean air and the natural environment, education, health, all of these things, without thinking that we can increase our material consumption on a finite planet forever. So, yes, that's a core part of the knowledge that we have to create. Now, having said that, I've quoted a political scientist and a rural sociologist. Let's acknowledge power. So the power of vested interests, the power of people who are enjoying very high standards of living, the political movements that are seeking to protect privilege. These are realities that we are having to combat. And one of the distinctive roles of a place like Lincoln University is critic and conscience of society. We are the people who should be standing up, speaking for the land and for the community about ecological and social justice. So, totally with you on that question.
Send down.
The knowledge aspect is fine, excellent. As you've just noted, you can't have exponential growth in material consumption on a finite planet. And one of the bits of the real world economics has always struggled with is acknowledging the role of energy and how so much of our growth has been through access to high level energy.
Yes.
Low energy return on energy, high energy return on energy investment. We're now out of that era of the easy fuel, and a lot of the damage we've done to ecosystems has been because we've had access to high energy fuels. How do you see the universities work contributing to a future where we are not dependent on the whole growth paradigm?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So the
I think Dick would have asked if
the question is that our economic growth has been fueled by easy access to high energy fossil fuels. And economists have taken that for granted. Steve King is the person who just published a book on this. Exaggerated in my view, but the fundamental point that we have taken that for granted. And so what role do universities have in opening up different visions for the future in that space of that reality? I haven't said it particularly well, but that's the gist of it. And so, look, the first thing to say is that the future is changing. We don't have control of the future, and so the energy resources that we have relied on and the way we are using them is producing dramatic climate change. The last 12 months, we have been 1.5 degrees hotter than in the average of the pre-industrial revolution. So we have reached the Paris Accord target, and we're just going to keep on getting hotter. We are seeing the impact in extreme weather events and the like. And so whether we are ready for it or not, the way we have been using energy has consequences. Whether we have recognised those consequences or not, those consequences have come home to roost. So, as a university, we are endowed with the resources to be part of the movement for change. Now, there are days when I don't think we're going to make it. It's just frightening, the scale of the ecological change our species has created. But on other days, I look at what amazing people are doing such amazing work individually and collaboratively, and in particular, the role that cities can play in addressing the challenges of the climate crisis. And I think we all have a role to play in that. I see our speakers. Good.
So, opportunity for one more
So
question.
Matt's got his hand up. We're going to give some of the writing replies. And
Thank you for that lecture, and it was very flattering to be acknowledged. I don't want to put you on the spot in front of presumably a lot of your colleagues, but I will. What do you, aside from the amazing new initiatives you pointed out in the strategy, what do you see as some of the distinctions of a whenua-based university in contrast to a land-based university?
I think it's the relationship. Okay, so it's the difference between thinking about all of those scientific journals and considering ourselves to be one of the top 5 land-based universities, if we are recognised as being one of the top 5 groups contributing to that global literature on how to control and manage the land, to thinking of ourselves as being embedded in our own natural environment and being the world expert, the world expert in understanding our own whenua. And I use the metaphor of listening to the stories in the land, not my metaphor, Moana Jackson's metaphor. But scientists will understand what I'm saying. It's about observation and experimentation. This is what we do. But it's listening to the whole of the experience of the whenua rather than siloing it into a productive system that we import from overseas and sustain as best we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul, many thanks for your presentation today. It's a small token of appreciation here. Yeah, and I'm sure we'd be delighted to join the board in the foyer for further conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Serving alcoholic beverages. So please let me remind you that your whānau wants you home safe, so please drink responsibly. So then with any further ado, I would like to introduce the Vice Chancellor of Lincoln University, Professor Grant Edwards.